When I conceived this little series looking at games that started on certain home computers, it was initially intended to be a one-off, and for this system in particular, the Amiga. The Amiga is my all-time favourite gaming system and the first computer we ever owned when I was a kid, so it holds a very special place in my heart. Many games were developed for DOS and or the Atari ST as well as the Amiga, so I won't be including those. A lot of hugely successful franchises began on the Amiga, some that have become so successful that they've been ported to a large number of other computers and consoles, so you may have played some of these games. But did you know they started out on the Amiga? Let's find out. Worms is by now a household name, but the very first Worms game was released for the Amiga in 1995. First published by Ocean in Europe, Worms was developed by Team 17 with its creator, Andy Davidson. If by some chance you haven't played a Worms game by now, it's a turn-based artillery game. Each team consists of 4 worms, and the players control a different worm each turn, rotating through the 4 in the team each go, assuming all 4 are still alive. The objective is to kill all the worms on the opposing teams, and that's it, a very simple game, but it's that simplicity that secured its success. On your turn, your worm can perform an action. This may be attack an enemy worm or worms with one of your several weapons. These might be long-range projectile weapons like a bazooka or grenade, or something up close and personal like a baseball bat. There are also several tools to use, for example the blowtorch, which lets you tunnel through the environment to reach the other side, or to entrench your worm for protection. The worms can also move, albeit slowly, and jump, or even get to harder to reach areas using grappling hooks and bungee cords. But time is of the essence, as your turn has a strict time limit. Time limits and other options for the level can be set in the preferences, for example the inclusion of landmines and the level's theme. Levels are randomly generated, which guarantees that the game stays fresh. The graphics and presentation are very comical and cartoony, which just fits in with the game's style perfectly. Worms is so addictive that you'll find yourself getting engrossed in it for hours on end, especially local multiplayer with some friends. It's very easy to get to grips with, and due to its chaotic and random nature, everyone has a chance of winning. The original Worms had a ton of ports, including for DOS, Mac, Amiga CD32, Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, PlayStation, Saturn, Atari Jaguar and Game Boy. Few franchises have spawned so many sequels and spin-offs in the history of gaming. Worms has seen over 20 games since the original, and that's excluding spin-off games like Worms Golf. There was a period that saw some experimentation with 3D Worms games, but I always felt these struggled to capture the joy of the 2D games. Thankfully the series went back to its 2D roots, and Team 17 has released some superb 2D Worms games in recent years. This series has pretty much graced every home computer, console and handheld that was around during or since 1995. Worms is definitely one of gaming's most prolific franchises, and it all started on the Amiga. Canon Fodder was developed by Sensible Software and released on the Amiga in 1993, published by Virgin. I'm not entirely sure how you describe the genre, but you control a squad of troops with the mouse, like a strategic point and click shooter, if that makes sense. Movement is controlled using mouse clicks and right clicking fires. When shooting, the mouse pointer displays a little red crosshair. Clicking both buttons will throw a grenade, or if equipped, fire rockets. Your squad consists of up to 5 troops, and you can control one or several of them at one time. If they survive and complete missions, they'll progressively rank up. It's heartbreaking to see one of your trusty soldiers die after many missions together. The graphics are gorgeous and levels are presented top down. It was developed using Sensible Soccer's engine, so has the same cutesy fun style. In fact, Sensible Software even released a crossover on a cover disc one Christmas called Canon Soccer. There are 72 levels in all, although I've never personally got that far, and you'll encounter all kinds of terrain along the way. Running in all guns blazing might work for a couple of missions, but pretty soon you'll find yourself getting overwhelmed by swarms of enemies, so an element of strategy must be employed to succeed. Do you collect the ammo and grenades, or blow up the crates to kill a group of enemies? Do you split up your squad into smaller groups or stick together? More often than not, I'll find myself replaying a level several times before completing it, learning the layout, the whereabouts of enemy troops and any ambushes, and the location of traps and hazards. There is a very basic map, but this pretty much just shows the location of the buildings and the rough layout of the terrain. I'll also have to replay levels because I've blown my own troops up, which is easily done. The objective is usually to kill all enemy troops and destroy buildings, and occasionally protect civilians. In later levels there are trickier enemies, including vehicles, gun turrets and more powerful weapons. The distance you can see is quite limited, so I can't count the amount of times an enemy with a rocket launcher has killed my whole squad from off screen before I've even seen them. Of all the Amiga games I love, Cannon Fodder is probably one of the games I go back to the most often. It's still brilliantly fun and challenging to this day, and it has that one more go factor. War has indeed never been so much fun. Cannon Fodder was ported to DOS, Atari ST, CD32, Acorn Archimedes, 3DO, Atari Jaguar, Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, and much later in the year 2000, the Game Boy Color. Cannon Fodder sought two sequels, Cannon Fodder 2 in '94, which came to both Amiga and DOS, and Cannon Fodder 3, which was released for Windows in 2011, but had nothing to do with the original developers and wasn't well received. Even though it only had two proper entries in the series during the Amiga era, its influence is undeniable, and it's a game that's still talked about very fondly today. The Lotus series is one of the most loved series of racing games for the early 90s, developed by Magnetic Fields and published by Gremlin. It was a trilogy of games: Lotus Esprit Turbo Challenge in 1990, Lotus Turbo Challenge 2 in 91, and Lotus 3 The Ultimate Challenge in 92. The Lotus games were a very arcadey experience, with fast-paced driving and lap-based courses that needed learning precisely. Knowing exactly when corners will appear and how severe is key to winning races. There were slight differences in the gameplay, with the original having 20 cars per race. Place high enough and you'll progress to the next race. Fuel was a finite resource, so occasionally refueling was necessary. The sequel, which is what you're seeing on screen, went even more arcadey and got rid of the limited fuel and went for time-based courses rather than laps where your position was what mattered. Perhaps the most welcome difference was that Lotus 2 utilised the entire screen for the driving, whereas the original used only half, with the lower half showing the car in a garage. The third entry, Lotus 3, combined both types of gameplay into one. It also added the Racing Environment Construction set, aka REX, which was a custom track editor. The Lotus games were gorgeous graphically for the time and had smooth and speedy gameplay that was challenging and very addictive. The pace of the driving was so good that it looks impressive even now. The first Lotus was ported to the Atari ST, Amstrad CPC, Commodore 64 and ZX Spectrum. Lotus 2 to Atari ST, Acorn Archimedes and Mega Drive. The Mega Drive version was simply called Lotus Turbo Challenge. Lotus 3 came to Atari ST, DOS and Mega Drive. The DOS port was called Lotus The Ultimate Challenge, and again the Mega Drive port was renamed to Lotus 2 REX in reference to the addition of the track builder. All three games also made their way to the CD32 in 1994 as a trilogy, which also saw Amiga and Atari ST releases. Although some versions of the Lotus games were subpar, the Amiga originals and the Atari ST ports were superb and very highly regarded. The series influenced the driving game genre in the early to mid 90s, right through to the present day where its style is still emulated, for example in the recent homage to the Lotus series from Acquirus, Horizon Chase Turbo. Lemmings is one of the most ported games ever. It was originally released for the Amiga by DMA Design, who went on to develop Grand Theft Auto, eventually becoming Rockstar North. It was published by Psygnosis in 1991. Lemmings is a shining example of a simple puzzle game done well, and it's this simplicity that makes it so much fun. The premise is simple: save the lemmings by preventing them from killing themselves and get them to the level's exit. The lemmings will keep walking regardless of what they encounter, unless they bump into something which causes them to turn around and walk the other way. That means that they'll carry on walking to their doom, even if there's a fatal fall or deadly hazard in their path. That's where you come in. You can assign tasks to each lemming, which gives them abilities like digging, building bridges, parachuting and so on. This can save their lives or the lives of their fellow lemmings. The number of each ability available is limited depending on the level, so working out how best to use your limited options is essential to completing the levels, particularly the later harder ones. The style is cutesy and fun, much like Worms, which was actually partly inspired to use a cartoony comedic style by Lemmings. The music is great too, with spoof versions of classical music, nursery rhymes and even other game soundtracks. Super addictive, and with that perfect balance of challenge versus reward that's not easy to get right, Lemmings is an all-time classic puzzle game. Its playability transcends time, so it's a timeless classic that's still as enjoyable to play today as it ever was. Let's just gloss over the ports segment of this one because it would take all day. A more suitable question would be which systems didn't get a Lemmings port. Although it was developed and published by many other companies, Lemmings made its way to most home computers and consoles in the 90s, all the way through to 2018 when the most recent remake was released for mobile platforms. Lemmings spawned a hugely profitable franchise with numerous sequels and spin-offs, seeing a level of success that has spanned the best part of 3 decades so far. It's often cited among lists of the best Amiga games and is widely regarded as one of the all-time greatest puzzlers. It's also common to hear developers mention it as a source of inspiration, so the influence of Lemmings is far-reaching indeed. When I was compiling this list, I'll admit that I expected to be talking about several Bitmap Brothers games, but actually most of them was developed for the Amiga and Atari ST, and some for the Atari ST first. One game that did come to the Amiga first was the Chaos Engine, published by Renegade Software in 1993. The Chaos Engine is a top-down run and gun very much like Gauntlet, set in an alternate version of Victorian England. A time traveller travels back in time to the 1800s and lets some advanced technology fall into the hands of an inventor. He reverse engineers this technology to create the titular Chaos Engine, which promptly goes all Skynet on him, becoming self-aware and plunges England into chaos, unleashing all manner of monsters and hostile robots. You choose any 2 mercenaries from a choice of 6 to take on these invaders and eventually the Chaos Engine itself. It can be played co-op or single player, where the computer controls the second character. The 6 available mercenaries are the Navvy, Thug, Brigand, Mercenary, Gentleman and Preacher. Each has varying strengths and abilities across a wide range of factors, including health, speed, weaponry, strength of and number of specials and so on. The cost to hire them differs as well. You start off with a pool of cash to spend, so the less you spend on hiring your 2 mercenaries, the more cash you have for upgrades. Yes, cash collected during the levels can be spent on upgrades to gear and weaponry, as well as the usual character abilities. Gameplay is pretty straightforward. You shoot your way through the levels set in 4 different worlds, collecting keys and shooting these electric poles which unlock the level's exit. That's pretty much it. Don't expect any deep puzzle solving elements here, so it can be a bit samey. Having said that, it's a ton of fun and reviewed very well at the time, subsequently becoming one of the most well regarded games on the Amiga and won a ton of awards. Visually, it has that distinct Bitmap Brothers style, complete with their signature colour palette. The Chaos Engine was ported to the Atari ST, RISC OS and Amiga CD32. The Mega Drive and Super Nintendo also received ports, but the character of the Preacher was renamed the Scientist and had his dog collar removed, because a gun-toting killer priest was a bit too much for Sega and Nintendo. In the US, these 2 ports were also renamed. Why stick with the awesome name of the Chaos Engine when you can have the bland and unoriginal Soldiers of Fortune? The Chaos Engine didn't really do much for the genre, but certainly solidified its place in the hearts of Amiga owners at the time. An enhanced AGA version followed, and a sequel, the Chaos Engine 2, was released in 1996, but that remained exclusive to the Amiga and CD32. A quote remake was released in 2013 for Windows, Mac and Linux, developed by Abstraction Games, but let's be honest, it was by no means a remake, it was just a remaster where they made it widescreen and made the graphics slightly worse. Shadow of the Beast is a trilogy of games initially developed for the Amiga, with the third game being an Amiga exclusive, all published by Psygnosis. The first came in 1989, with Shadow of the Beast 2 and 3 being released in 1990 and 1992 respectively. Platform games with puzzle elements, they had very dark storylines. Unusually, these games were a huge influence on gaming and on me in particular, but they're not very good games. Shadow of the Beast is just frustratingly hard. It's so difficult, so easy to die, and hard to even work out where you're supposed to go or what to do. Just downright annoying. But where these games excelled was with their graphics and sound. Man, could they show off the Amiga's capabilities. At the time, absolutely nothing looked this good on Amiga, or on any system for that matter. It really was mind-blowing. I remember when we got our Amiga 500, it was the Screen Gems pack which came with Shadow of the Beast 2. When I saw that intro screen with the lightning and the creature stealing the baby, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was like being hurled into the future. The game is just visually and audibly stunning. Of course, this was a wonderful advertisement for the Amiga. Look at this, look what the Amiga can do. Sadly, the gameplay wasn't enjoyable. Many reviewers gave the first two games very high ratings, which I think is ridiculous given their lack of accessibility. The third game did iron out some of the frustrating aspects of the first two games, but far fewer people seem to have played that one back in the day, perhaps due to its later 1992 release, or perhaps because consumers had already had their fingers burnt with its predecessors. Shadow of the Beast was ported to the Atari ST, Amstrad CPC, Commodore 64, Speccy, Sega Master System and Mega Drive, Atari Lynx, FM Towns and the TurboGrafx CD. Shadow of the Beast 2 to Atari ST, FM Towns, Mega Drive and Mega CD. For some reason the PAL Mega CD artwork has the title stylized as just Beast 2, although it is still called Shadow of the Beast 2. And the third game was, as I said, an Amiga exclusive. Despite its shortcomings, the Shadow of the Beast trilogy was a huge influence, especially on Amiga developers, because it forced everyone to try to up their game. Megalomania was developed by Sensible Software and published for the Amiga in 1991 by Imageworks. In North America it was renamed to the rather on-the-nose title of Tyrants Fight Through Time, as per their custom of taking a cool title and changing it to something that needlessly over-explains the game. Megalomania is a real-time strategy game, and bear in mind this was 1991, so this is really early in the genre's life. Westwood Studios' Dune 2 wasn't released until 1992, a year after Megalomania, and that's considered by many to be the catalyst for the genre's popularity, so Megalomania could be considered the first true RTS. Herzog's Spy was released in 1989, described as a real-time strategy, but it also incorporated other gameplay elements, making Megalomania and RTS more in line with how we know the genre today. As much as I love Dune 2, Megalomania is one of my childhood favourites, and I played the Amiga version a lot, although it was one of its ports that I sank the most time into. More on that later. You choose one of 4 gods to play as, controlling a tribe of humans as they struggle to survive and evolve. The levels are split into sets of 3 called epochs, with each epoch consisting of 3 islands. These islands vary in size and shape. The aim is to become the dominating tribe on the island, defeating your opponents to claim the island for your tribe. When selecting a level, you have 2 strategic decisions to make before you've even started. 1. How many tribesmen to send down to the island, and 2. Where to place them. You start with 100 humans, and the aim is to complete the levels using the fewest possible men. The fewer you use, the more that carry over to be used on the next level, so saving as many as possible for the harder later levels is essential. The placement of your tribe will have 2 consequences. One is the resources available to you, as different squares on the map will yield different resources that you can mine. The other thing to consider is defence. A square that has only one exposed side will be easier to defend than one surrounded by land on all sides. Knowing how many men to use or which square will provide the best raw materials is utter guesswork until you've actually played the level, so it will take several replays until you master it enough to make informed decisions. Once you're actually down on the island and playing, you have to assign tasks to each of your tribesmen. This can be one of 5 jobs: mining resources, researching new technology, manufacturing, attacking enemies, or defending your buildings. The more technology you research, the more weaponry you discover. As your technological prowess increases, you will advance a tech level, complete with a fantastic voice sample to inform you.
We've advanced a tech level.
As you advance, your civilization advances through time, so you may start off in mud huts or primitive medieval buildings, advancing to modern and even futuristic technology. As well as offensive and defensive weaponry, advancing your civilization also brings with it new buildings which can help you harvest new resources. You need to balance the assignment of tasks, put enough manpower into research and the manufacture of new weapons and buildings, but leave enough to defend your buildings and subsequently attack your enemy's squares. Attacking a square will damage the enemy buildings, and once the last building is destroyed, you'll own the square. You can then build your own buildings and build on empty squares. This can be essential, especially if the resources in your initial square have been depleted. Defending works pretty much the same, with you assigning defensive troops to the turrets on your buildings and ground troops to fight it out with invading armies. The ability for your men to do well in battle depends solely on their equipped weapons, so you'll need to make enough of them to arm your army. A tribe with advanced weaponry will easily and very quickly trounce that of an inferior tribe, so you can't afford to get left behind. Another interesting gameplay aspect is that you can form alliances with rival gods whenever the number of enemy gods totals more than 1. A proposed alliance will be met with an often hilarious voiced reply from the god, stating whether they accept or reject your proposal.
No, it's never gonna work.
You want to come on my team? No way. No, I don't think so.
An agreed alliance will ensure that god doesn't attack you for the duration of the pact, and you can use this to join forces against a strong enemy. Alliances can only last so long, as the level can ultimately have only one winner. One of the highlights of this game is the voice samples, which inform you of your civilization's progress, and as I said, the replies of the rival gods. It would be remiss of me not to show you some, so let's have a quick listen to some of the best ones.
The production run's completed.
We've conquered the sector.
One last gameplay aspect worth mentioning is that there are 3 game speeds. If you don't want to wait for a particularly long production time or research project, you can speed up time temporarily so time passes quicker. The presentation is top notch, with the controls being very intuitive and streamlined once you know where everything is. The graphics are excellent and very cartoony in the usual Sensible Software style, much like Sensible Soccer or Cannon Fodder, which we saw earlier. Megalomania was ported to the Atari ST-DOS, Mega Drive, Super Nintendo and a few Japanese home computers. Imageworks published the ST port, but the rest had various different publishers. The Mega Drive port is the one I played the most, being one of my childhood favourites on Sega's 16-bit console. The port is fantastic and is quite a unique gameplay experience on the Mega Drive. I also prefer the Mega Drive's box art, although the Genesis version, which as I mentioned was renamed Tyrant's Fight Through Time, is more in line with the Amiga's original box art. Megalomania can be considered the first true real-time strategy game, so its influence is undeniable. It Came From the Desert was developed and published by Cinemaware for the Amiga in 1989. Living up to Cinemaware's name, this was a film-like game with a dramatic story in the style of 50s B-movies. One particular influence was the 1954 film Them, starring giant killer ants. The story sees you take on the role of a geologist in the 1950s, investigating a meteor crash in a small American town that's turned the local ant population into giant mutants, or mute-ants if you will. The gameplay is a really weird mixture of genres. A lot of it plays like an adventure game with you investigating and talking to residents, but it throws in top-down shooting, first-person shooting and even top-down driving sections. It's a race against time, as you only have a set amount of in-game time to discover the source of the ants and save the town. Intriguing gameplay choices aside, it was the game's atmosphere that really grabbed me as a kid. Games in the late 80s were only just starting to utilise storytelling in a way that even vaguely resembled that of films, so this was a mesmerising concept for me. The mechanic that was perhaps most revolutionary was that the game had to be replayed in order to complete it properly, using knowledge gained in previous playthroughs. As the player, you become a sort of video game time traveller, taking your knowledge of events back to the past to alter the game's outcome. Only by knowing where to be and at what time can you defeat the ants invading the town. If executed correctly, your strategy will result in you entering the ant colony and destroying the queen, leading to the most optimal of the game's endings. As if the mishmash of gameplay styles wasn't already enough, another fun one comes into play when you die. Well, you never really die, instead you wake up in hospital and will suffer a time penalty for the time you spent there. Where it gets fun is you can opt to escape from the hospital, and if you succeed in doing so, your time penalty is greatly reduced. It Came From the Desert ended up being this strange melting pot of gameplay styles, but they really succeeded in putting across that cinematic feel. It Came From the Desert didn't receive many ports, only to DOS in 1990 and the TurboGrafx CD in 91. The latter was an absolute travesty, changing the player character and story and changing the top-down shooting sections to side-scrolling action. Worst of all, it replaces the character dialogue screens with hideous FMV footage. An expansion followed called Antheads, It Came From the Desert 2, although it was an expansion rather than a standalone sequel. Years ago, CinemaAware were planning to release it for the Mega Drive. There was a pre-order available, and I remember discussing the port with one of the developers at an expo years ago and even saw a prototype running, but I have no idea if this was actually released in the end. If anyone knows, let me know in the comments. A film was released in 2017 called It Came From the Desert, based on the game. The story is quite different, being rather teen angsty, although it retains the giant ant theme. It's awful, but it's actually worth a watch if you like those films that are so bad they're almost good. Zool was developed and published on the Amiga by Gremlin in 1992. I played this game a lot as a kid, and apparently Zool, the ninja of the nth dimension, is a gremlin, a play on the developer's name, not an ant. Okay. A platform game, Zool was conceived as the Amiga's answer to Sonic. Although it really wasn't, it was a valiant effort and a thoroughly well executed and playable platformer. It does emulate Sonic with a decent enough sense of speed, certainly when compared to other Amiga platformers, and looks very good and has great music. Zool can run around, jump, cling to walls and wall jump, and he can also shoot. He can also perform a spinning attack, and there are several power-ups to collect too. It was notable for its use of product placement, as it was developed in association with Chupa Chups. The branding is prolific, appearing not only on the title screen but in the game, particularly on the first level, which is a land made entirely of sweets. The platforming gameplay is occasionally broken up by minigames, including some scrolling shooter sections. Zool was ported to the Atari ST, Acorn Archimedes, DOS, Sega Master System, Mega Drive and Game Gear, Nintendo's NES, Super Nintendo and Game Boy, and the CD32, on which it had an enhanced soundtrack. Not much of a legacy with Zool, although it tried to mimic Sonic and even market itself as a Sonic beta, it didn't quite live up to the promise. It did spawn one sequel, Zool 2, the following year. The original later had an enhanced AGA release on which the CD32 version was based. There were also randomly two novels released based on Zool. Another Cinemaware game here, Defender of the Crown, which was actually their first game, released on the Amiga in 1986. Cinemaware started as they meant to go on with Defender of the Crown, creating games that were more interactive movies, taking inspiration from the history of cinema rather than prior games, and targeting those experiences at a more mature audience. In the game, set in the Middle Ages during the Norman Conquest, you take on the role of one of 4 Saxons vying for the rule of England, taking on the invading Normans and fighting your opponents for territory. The game plays very much like a game of Risk. You select enemy territory to conquer and battle for control of said territory. You can build your army over time, increasing your offensive power. Much like Cinemaware's subsequent games like It Came From the Desert that we just saw, the gameplay mixes it up with minigames of various genres. You might be sword fighting in a side-on viewpoint, jousting in first person, or using your catapult to lay siege to an opponent's castle. It might not look like much now, but these graphics were absolutely incredible at the time. Bear in mind this was 1986, nothing at the time had pixel art with this level of detail. In 1987 it was ported to the C64, Atari ST, DOS and Mac, and was later ported to the NES, Amstrad CPC, ZX Spectrum, Apple II GS, CD-TV, CDI and Atari Jaguar. Defender of the Crown showed very early on that the Amiga was an absolute beast when it came to graphics and sound. When this was released in 1986, the Amiga was only in its second year, so visually it really was a huge milestone for computer gaming. Not only does the Amiga version look much better than the DOS version, but the music is just on another level. It sounds like music rather than the beeps and boops of the DOS version soundtrack. Defender of the Crown not only helped cement the Amiga's reputation as a graphical marvel, but it influenced the world of video game artwork as a whole, proving what could be achieved on the current hardware. If you want to play Defender of the Crown, you can find it over at GOG.com, and at the time of writing it's only £1.19, and interestingly it lets you select either the Amiga or DOS CGA version. Populous was developed by Bullfrog with Peter Molyneux heading up the project. It was published for the Amiga in 1989 by EA after several publishers turned it down due to its risky nature. The risk being that this was uncharted waters because Populous was the first ever god game. Your role is as a god presiding over the land and over your followers. The goal is to help your followers multiply and survive while thwarting the success of your enemy god's worshippers. You can manipulate the land in several ways, shaping it so that your worshippers can build settlements, and the more the settlements grow, the more followers you gain. You can raise and lower the land, which is generally done to make the land flat upon which settlers can build. More followers means more mana, which can be used to execute divine justice using various godly powers. So the more populous your settlement, the more powerful you become, feeding off of their worship like some kind of biblical parasite. The powers are various forms of natural disaster like earthquakes, volcanoes and floods. The game is presented isometrically with a map in the book at the top left to show the entire gameplay area and the main square showing the area you're currently in. It's not ideal, but it does work. The various controls look intimidating at first, but they're all quite useful and there are some handy shortcuts once you know what everything does. The divine powers are set above the main square in gold. A lot of room for improvement there, but visually it was quite intriguing in 1989. I remember being fascinated by the terraforming and would marvel at the ability to raise and lower the terrain. Populous was ported to the Atari ST, DOS, Mac, Acorn Archimedes, Sharp X68000, Master System, Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, TurboGrafx 16 and PlayStation. A new DS version called Populous DS was released in 2008, which made use of the handheld stylus controls. The original Populous received a few expansions, but these were just modifications to the game's appearance. In 1990 Bullfrog released a spiritual successor to Populous, Powermonger. It used the same game engine, but uses a 3D map display. Again, this received a wide range of home computer and console ports. A true sequel, Populous 2 Trials of the Olympian Gods, was released in 1991, only receiving Amiga, ST and PC versions. Populous can be credited with kickstarting an entire genre, regarded by most as being the original God game, so its influence is still noticeable today despite the wane in the genre's popularity. Pinball Dreams was developed by Digital Illusions aka DICE for the Amiga, released in 1992. This was the definitive pinball game at the time, featuring tables that actually looked and operated like a real-world pinball machine would. It featured 4 tables: the space-themed Ignition, Wild West-themed Steel Wheel, music-themed Beatbox, and horror-themed Nightmare. The tables offer some good variety, not only in how they play, but in the presentation, music and sound effects, which are all wonderfully suited to their respective table, from the twanging banjos of Steel Wheel to the evil laugh in Nightmare. The sound effects were particularly impressive, adding to that sense that you were playing a real pin, with sounds and voice samples popping off all the time whenever something happens, like the activation of a bonus or a feature. Pinball Dreams was ported to DOS, the Atari Falcon, Game Boy, Game Gear, Game Boy Advance and Super Nintendo. In 2002 it was released on GamePOX GP32, and versions came to PlayStation Network, OS X and iOS devices between 2009 and 2011. And incredibly, a port was released for the Amstrad CPC in 2019. Pinball Dreams spawned 2 very successful sequels, Pinball Fantasies and Pinball Illusions, and there were numerous spin-offs developed by other studios. It definitely changed the way in which pinball video games were made going forward. So that was 12 games and franchises that began life on the Amiga. Definitely some big names there from the 16-bit era. Are you a fan of any of these, and did you play them on Amiga or on something else? Let me know in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching. You can find the other episodes in this little series in this playlist.